Before software, before screens, before notifications, dashboards, and databases, there was a time when entire companies operated without a single line of code. Offices were quiet in a different way, not silent, but filled with sounds we no longer hear. The steady rhythm of typewriters, the rustle of paper being sorted, the soft slam of filing cabinet drawers opening and closing. Every process, every decision, every record existed physically, on paper, in folders, inside boxes stacked from floor to ceiling. There were no cloud backups, no search bars, no instant access to information. If you wanted to find a contract, you didn't type a keyword. You walked, you searched. You trusted that someone, somewhere, had filed it correctly. Entire departments existed solely to organize information. Clerks, assistants, archivists, people whose job was to remember where things were stored. Mistakes were not undone with a click. Errors meant starting over. A single typo could require rewriting an entire document from the beginning. And yet, somehow, businesses functioned. Payroll was processed, invoices were paid, decisions were made. Millions of people worked together without digital systems holding everything together. This world required patience, discipline, and an extraordinary dependence on human memory and organization. In this video, we will travel back to that time to understand how offices truly worked before software replaced paper, before systems became invisible, before work became digital. How did entire companies function without software? Let's begin.
Before software existed, paper was not just a tool inside the office. Paper was the system itself. Every process depended on physical documents. Nothing started, nothing moved forward, and nothing ended without paper. If a company hired someone, it was written down. If money changed hands, it was recorded. If a decision was made, it left a paper trail behind it. Paper represented authority. It represented responsibility. And most importantly, it represented proof. Contracts were typed manually, reviewed line by line, and signed in ink. Once signed, they became binding objects, not files. Objects. Invoices were created by hand or typewriter, often using carbon paper to generate multiple copies at once. One copy stayed with accounting, another went to archives, another was sent to the client. Each copy had a purpose, and each copy had to match perfectly. Because of this, accuracy was critical. Paper demanded discipline in a way digital systems no longer require. Forms followed strict layouts, margins mattered, spacing mattered. Every field existed for a reason. There was no flexibility to improvise. Employees were trained to respect these standards. They learned how to fill documents correctly, how to avoid ambiguity, and how to follow procedures exactly as defined. Handwriting was a professional skill. Clear, legible writing was not optional, it was essential. A single unreadable number could cause serious problems. A poorly written date could delay payments. A missing signature could invalidate an entire transaction. Because of this, many offices rejected documents that were not properly filled. They were returned for correction, sometimes days later. Carbon paper played a central role in this world. Before photocopiers became widespread, carbon paper was the fastest way to duplicate information. Sheets were stacked together, with carbon paper placed between them. When the typewriter struck a letter, the pressure transferred the ink to the pages below. This meant that every keystroke mattered. A typo did not affect just one page, it affected every copy. There was no way to fix it cleanly. Corrections looked unprofessional. Often, the only solution was to start over completely. Time was expensive. Paper was expensive. Mistakes had real cost. Paper also made work visible. Stacks of documents on a desk were signals. They showed workload.
They showed urgency. They showed responsibility. An overflowing inbox meant tasks waiting. A clean desk meant work completed. Managers could walk through an office and understand its state simply by looking at the paper. But paper also slowed everything down. Documents had to move physically from one person to another, from one desk to the next, from one department to another. A request could sit on a desk waiting for a signature. An approval could be delayed simply because someone was not present. There were no notifications, no reminders, only human memory. This made patience a requirement of office life. Processes took time not because people were inefficient, but because paper moved at the speed of people. And with physical documents came physical risks. Paper could be lost, filed incorrectly, damaged by water, destroyed by fire, or simply misplaced and forgotten. Losing a document could mean losing proof of a transaction, losing legal protection, or losing money. Because of this, offices developed strict rules around paper handling: who could touch certain documents, where they could be stored, how long they needed to be kept. Some papers were kept for months, others for years, some for decades. Entire roles existed just to manage this responsibility. Clerks, archivists, administrative assistants. Their job was not decision-making, it was preservation. They protected the memory of the organization. In this world, information was not abstract or invisible. It had weight, volume, and presence. You could feel the workload, you could see progress, and you could physically lose control if paper piled up faster than it could be processed. For decades, this system worked. Companies grew, governments expanded, entire economies functioned on paper alone. But as organizations became larger and more complex, paper began to show its limits. The more documents existed, the harder it became to control them. And that challenge led to the rise of structured filing systems, archives, and endless cabinets designed to impose order on growing chaos. That is what we'll explore in the next chapter.
As paper continued to accumulate, offices faced a growing problem. Documents were everywhere. Desks filled up, shelves overflowed, folders stacked higher and higher. Paper had been enough to run businesses, but without structure, it quickly turned into chaos. This is where filing systems became essential. Filing cabinets were not just furniture, they were the physical memory of the organization. Tall metal cabinets lined office walls. Each drawer contained hundreds, sometimes thousands of documents. Every folder represented a client, a project, a transaction, or an employee. Organization followed strict rules. Some systems were alphabetical, names sorted from A to Z. Others were numerical, based on account numbers, employee IDs, or reference codes. Once a system was chosen, it could not be changed easily. Consistency was everything. A single document filed incorrectly could disappear for years. Labels mattered, folder colors mattered, even the position of documents inside a folder mattered. These systems were designed to reduce confusion, but they required discipline to work. As companies grew, filing cabinets multiplied. What started as a few drawers in a small office became entire rooms dedicated solely to storage. Archive rooms appeared. These rooms were often quiet, windowless, and carefully controlled. Shelves ran from floor to ceiling. Boxes were stacked in precise order. Dust was the enemy. Inside these archives lived the long-term memory of the company. Old contracts, past invoices, historical records, documents that might not be needed today but could become critical tomorrow. Some papers were stored for legal reasons, others for financial audits, some simply because no one knew if they could be discarded safely. Time rules applied. Certain documents were kept for 5 years, others for 10, some indefinitely. Destroying a document too early could be dangerous. Keeping it too long consumed valuable space. This balance was managed by people. Clerks and archivists played a crucial role in this world. Their job was not visible, but it was vital. They understood the filing system better than anyone else. They knew where documents were stored, how they were categorized, and how to retrieve them efficiently.
In many offices, these people became living search engines. If you needed information, you didn't ask a computer, you asked them. Where can I find this file? Which cabinet holds these records? Do we still have that document from years ago? Their knowledge was built over time, through repetition, through experience. Replacing them was difficult. When an experienced archivist left, they took years of organizational memory with them. Searching for information was slow. Finding a document meant physically moving through space, walking to the archive room, opening drawers, scanning labels by eye. Sometimes the process was quick. Other times it took hours. If the document was not where it was supposed to be, the search expanded. Nearby folders, adjacent cabinets, boxes and storage. Entire afternoons could be spent looking for a single piece of paper. This time cost was accepted as normal. Searching was part of the job. Meetings were delayed, decisions postponed, processes paused, all because information had to be found physically. There was also a constant fear of misfiling. A document placed in the wrong folder might as well be lost, not destroyed, just invisible. This is why filing rules were strict. Documents had to be returned to their exact place after use. No shortcuts, no temporary storage on desks for too long. Breaking these rules caused friction. Archivists enforced discipline. They corrected mistakes. They rejected improper filing. In some offices, access to archives was restricted. Only authorized personnel could enter. Only certain documents could be handled by specific roles. This protected sensitive information, but it also added another layer of delay. Nothing was instant. Yet, despite all of this, the system worked for decades. It was slow, but it was reliable. Information existed in one place. It could be verified. It could be traced. Paper left a trail. But as document volume kept growing, filing cabinets reached their limits. Space became a problem, maintenance became expensive, and human memory could only scale so far. The more information existed, the harder it became to control it physically. This pressure pushed offices to search for better ways to manage information flow, coordinate work, and reduce dependence on physical storage. And that challenge reshaped how people worked together. In the next chapter, we'll explore how offices handled communication before emails, messaging apps, and instant notifications existed. Before computers entered the office, the typewriter was the center of productivity. It was not just a tool, it was the machine that transformed thoughts into official reality. Every letter, every report, every contract passed through a typewriter. If something needed to exist formally, it needed to be typed. Typewriters defined the rhythm of the office. The sound of keys striking paper was constant, a mechanical, repetitive noise that filled entire rooms. It was the sound of work being done. Speed mattered, but precision mattered even more. Unlike modern keyboards, typewriters offered no forgiveness. There was no undo, no backspace that erased mistakes cleanly, no copy and paste to reuse text. Each keystroke was permanent. Once ink touched paper, it stayed there. If a mistake was small, it might be corrected manually. Correction fluid, correction tape, sometimes even a careful strike-through. But these fixes were visible. They reduced the professional appearance of the document. For important papers, corrections were unacceptable. A single typo could invalidate an entire page. In many cases, the only solution was to start over. Entire documents were rewritten because of one wrong letter, one extra space, one misaligned line. This reality shaped how people worked. Before typing a document, employees planned carefully. They outlined text mentally. They rehearsed sentences. They checked details in advance. Typing was not spontaneous, it was deliberate. This is why training was essential. Typing was a specialized skill. Not everyone could do it well. Secretaries, typists, and administrative assistants received formal instruction. They learned finger placement, typing speed, accuracy under pressure. Some could type without looking at the keyboard. Others specialized in formatting complex documents. Margins, spacing, indentation, all of it had to be correct. Because formatting was not automatic. If margins were wrong, the page had to be retyped. If spacing was inconsistent, the document looked unprofessional. Every page demanded attention. Physical endurance mattered too. Typing for hours was tiring. Hands ached, wrists strained, yet productivity depended on output. The faster and more accurate a typist was, the more valuable they became. In many offices, typists formed the backbone of operations. Managers dictated letters, executives reviewed drafts, but typists transformed ideas into final documents. This separation of roles was common. Thinking and writing were often done by different people. Dictation was widely used. A manager would speak, a typist would listen and type. Errors in dictation created errors on paper, and again, corrections were costly. This made communication slower, but also more careful. People chose words deliberately because rewriting took time. Manual writing still played an important role. Not everything was typed. Notes were written by hand, annotations added in margins, calculations scribbled on paper. Handwriting carried personal responsibility. A handwritten note often meant urgency or instruction or approval. Signatures were critical. They transformed documents from drafts into official records. Ink mattered. A signed document could not be easily denied or altered. This is why handwriting quality remained important even in typed environments. Poor handwriting caused confusion. Clear handwriting built trust. Together, typewriters and manual writing created a working environment that demanded focus. Distractions were costly. Mistakes were expensive. Speed without accuracy created problems. Work moved forward carefully, slower than today, but often with greater intention. Every document represented time, effort, and concentration. And while this system worked for decades, it placed enormous pressure on people. As document volume kept growing, the demand for typing increased. More letters, more reports, more forms. The limits of human speed and endurance became visible. Offices needed a way to produce more with fewer errors, less repetition, and less physical strain. And that need would eventually reshape how documents were created forever. But before that transformation arrived, typewriters ruled the office. They defined productivity, they enforced discipline, and they shaped an entire generation of work culture.
Before email, communication inside offices was physical, delayed, and deliberate. Messages did not arrive instantly, they traveled. Information moved through paper, wires, and people, and every step introduced time, effort, and risk of misunderstanding. The most common form of internal communication was the memo. Memos were short written documents used to share information within an organization. They announced decisions, assigned tasks, explained procedures. Each memo followed a formal structure: date, recipient, subject, message. Tone mattered. Once written, a memo could not be casually edited. It represented an official position. Memos were printed and physically distributed, placed on desks, inserted into inbox trays, sometimes pinned to bulletin boards. Reading them was part of the daily routine. But memos moved slowly. If someone was absent, the message waited. Urgency depended on physical presence. Telephone calls offered faster communication but introduced new complexity. Phones were shared resources. In many offices, employees did not have direct phone lines. Calls passed through switchboards. Operators connected callers manually, routing calls using plugs and cables. This made communication human-mediated. If lines were busy, calls waited. If someone was unavailable, messages were taken by hand. Written notes replaced voicemail. Errors could occur. Names misunderstood, numbers written incorrectly, messages shortened or altered unintentionally. Yet telephones changed office dynamics. They enabled real-time conversation, immediate clarification, direct human interaction. But they also interrupted work. A ringing phone demanded attention. There was no silent mode. Fax machines later bridged the gap between paper and speed. They allowed documents to be sent over telephone lines. Pages were scanned, transmitted, and printed on the other side. This was revolutionary. Contracts, signatures, and forms could be shared in minutes instead of days. But fax communication was fragile. Pages could be lost, quality degraded, lines failed. Confirmation often required a follow-up call. Postal services remained essential. External communication relied heavily on mail. Letters, packages, and official documents traveled through postal systems. Delivery times varied, days, sometimes weeks. Planning had to account for this delay. Deadlines were set with buffers. Expectations were managed carefully. Misunderstandings were common. Without instant clarification, messages were interpreted based on context and tone. A poorly written memo could create confusion.
A rushed phone message could lead to mistakes. Clarifying required another memo, another call, more time. Communication was not continuous. It happened in bursts. Between messages, people worked with incomplete information. This made coordination harder. Meetings played a central role. Face-to-face conversations were the most reliable form of communication. They reduced ambiguity. They allowed immediate feedback. But they required scheduling. Getting everyone in the same room took time. Despite these challenges, offices adapted. Employees learned to write clearly, to speak precisely, to confirm understanding. Communication required intention. Nothing was casual. Messages carried weight because they were slow. Every delay forced reflection. But as organizations grew larger and more distributed, these systems strained. Delays increased, misunderstandings multiplied. The demand for faster, clearer communication became undeniable, and that demand would eventually transform how offices connected forever. In the next chapter, we'll explore how managers monitored work and maintained control without dashboards, metrics, or real-time analytics. Before digital systems, management relied on presence. Control was physical, visible, human. Supervisors did not open dashboards or reports. They walked through offices. They observed desks, stacks of paper, conversations in progress, the pace of movement. Work was measured by what could be seen. An active desk suggested productivity. An empty desk raised questions. A growing pile of documents signaled delay. Managers relied on proximity. Being present was a form of control. Meetings were the primary coordination tool. Without shared digital systems, alignment happened face-to-face. Teams gathered to exchange updates, clarify priorities, resolve misunderstandings. Some meetings were formal, with agendas and handwritten notes. Others were spontaneous, called when problems appeared. Decisions were made in rooms, not in dashboards. Action items were assigned verbally. Follow-up depended on memory and discipline. Time tracking was mechanical. Employees clocked in and out using punch cards. A physical card recorded arrival and departure times. Machines stamped time onto cardboard. Each punch created a permanent record. Supervisors reviewed these cards regularly. Hours were totaled by hand. Payroll depended on accuracy. There was little flexibility. A missed punch required explanation. Corrections were manual. Mistakes were visible. Human memory replaced analytics. Managers remembered progress. They knew who was responsible for what, who was overloaded, who was falling behind. This knowledge came from experience, from conversations in hallways, from repeated observation, from daily interaction. Good managers developed strong situational awareness. They noticed subtle changes, a slower pace, a tense conversation, a desk that stayed full for too long. Problems surfaced when they became visible. There were no alerts, no automated warnings, no real-time metrics. Control was personal, but also subjective. Different supervisors applied different standards. Consistency depended on the individual. As organizations grew larger and more distributed, these systems strained. Delays increased. Misunderstandings multiplied. The demand for faster, clearer communication became undeniable. And that demand would eventually transform how offices connected forever. As typewriters fell silent. Filing cabinets emptied. Work became invisible, digital, abstract. Efficiency increased, errors decreased, speed became normal. But something else changed too, the way people experienced work. Understanding how offices functioned without software reminds us that technology did not create work. It replaced systems humans once carried themselves. And it invites a final question. As software continues to evolve, what parts of work should remain human? That question is still open.